3 in the morning. The lobby of Mercy General Hospital in Baltimore was the color of old teeth, fluorescent white, going yellow at the edges, the kind of light that made everyone look a little unwell. It was a light that had been installed to be efficient and had succeeded at being efficient and had never once been accused of being kind. It hummed. If you stood under it long enough, you stopped hearing the hum, and then on certain nights you heard it again, and those were the long nights. A man in a Navy security uniform walked the perimeter in the same order he always did: south wall, east corridor, loading bay doors, back through the main atrium, past the reception desk with its sleeping attendant, past the elevator bank, past the vending machines, one of which had not worked in 4 months and which he had reported 14 times. He moved without hurrying, not slow, efficient, the kind of pace that belongs to someone who has done the same route so many times that his body does it and his mind is somewhere else entirely. At the south entrance, he stopped. He looked out through the glass at the parking lot, rows of cars, a lamppost with a dead bulb on the far end that facilities had been notified about twice, nothing moving. He stood there for exactly the amount of time he always stood there. Then he turned and walked back toward the desk. Outside, a delivery truck was pulling into the loading bay around the corner. He could hear it, the particular sound of the hydraulic brakes on that specific truck, which arrived every Tuesday and Thursday at 17 minutes past 3, which was 3 minutes later than the scheduled time, which had been 3 minutes later than the scheduled time for 11 consecutive months. He had stopped writing it in the log. He had logged things that mattered. He had learned, over time, to know the difference. His name was James Osei. He was 52 years old. He had worked this shift 11 at night to 7 in the morning for 8 years. He had stood at that south entrance, on that exact square of tile, 2,912 times. He had never once been asked why. Stay with me, what happens next is the part that stays with you. James made $21.40 an hour. After taxes, after the parking permit for the lot 6 blocks from his apartment on East Biddle Street, after the $5 copay for the prescription anti-inflammatory he took every morning with his breakfast, he brought home approximately $2,100 a month. The cost of living adjustment that Mercy General gave its support staff was 43 cents annually. He had been grateful for it the first year. By the third year, he had stopped noticing it. He owned 2 pairs of work shoes. Both were the same brand, black, non-slip sole, the kind required by the hospital's security contractor. The left one had a small separation at the toe where the glue had given out. He had re-glued it himself using a tube of contact cement from the hardware store on Greenmount Avenue. Then again, 6 months later, the cobbler, 2 blocks from his apartment, a Vietnamese man named Min, who had been in the same shop for 30 years and who did not waste words, had looked at the shoe and said the sole was too worn to hold another bond. James had thanked him and kept the shoes. He kept them because they were broken in. A new pair meant 2 weeks of blisters and a different relationship between his foot and the floor, and he was on that floor 8 hours a night, and the floor did not forgive a shoe it did not know. So he kept the old ones, and he checked the toe each morning, and on the mornings the glue had let go again. He pressed it back with his thumb and held it and counted to 60, which was usually enough. He lived on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator. His knees had begun speaking to him on the stairs, sometime in the 4th year of the job, not during the shift, not when he was moving, but going down in the morning after 8 hours on his feet, the right knee in particular, which had an opinion about descending that the left one did not share. He had developed a way of turning his right foot slightly outward on each step, which redistributed the weight toward the outside of the joint. It was not comfortable. It worked. He made breakfast before he slept, always. It was a rule he had set for himself when he first started nights, because he had learned quickly that if he slept first he would wake up disoriented and eat whatever was available, which was usually not the right thing. So he came home and made something real. Eggs, if there were eggs. Oatmeal, when the eggs ran out. Toast with peanut butter on weeks when money was tight and payday was still 3 days off. He ate standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down at that hour had a way of becoming sleeping in a chair, which was not the same as sleeping in a bed, and left him stiff in the afternoons. His daughter Nadia was 26. She lived in Philadelphia with her partner, a schoolteacher named Darnell, and a dog named something James could never remember on the first try. She called on Sunday evenings. He was almost always awake. Sunday nights were his days off, and his body clock ran on its own schedule regardless of the calendar. They talked for 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. She asked about the job. He told her the parts worth telling. She told him about the school where she worked. She was a reading specialist at a public elementary in West Philadelphia. And he listened carefully because she was good at her work, and he liked hearing people talk about things they were good at. She had told him once, when she was 17 and furious about something he could no longer reconstruct, that he was the most infuriating person she had ever met because he refused to be bothered by things that ought to bother him. He had thought about that for a long time. He had decided she was not wrong. She was measuring by a different standard than the one he used, and both standards had some validity, and the truth was probably in the distance between them. His standard had been calibrated by a man named Franklin Osei. Franklin Osei had worked for the City of Baltimore Department of Public Works for 26 years. Sanitation. Same route, same section of Northeast Baltimore, most of those years. He came home every day smelling like what other people had thrown away. He showered before dinner. He sat at the table and ate with his wife and his son and asked James about his day. James had been 12 years old when he found the wallet on the number 13 bus. Brown leather, worn at the corners, with a tarnished snap closure that did not snap anymore. Inside, $214 in cash 10s and 20s, folded once a Maryland driver's license with a woman's photograph on it, a library card, and a small picture of a woman with 3 children, the children in matching church clothes, the woman laughing at something outside the frame. He had looked at his father. His father had said, "Find the person it belongs to." James had said, "How?" His father had pointed at the driver's license. It had taken James 2 weeks, 3 bus transfers, and a conversation with the woman's neighbor on Bel Air Road before he found the right address. He had knocked on the door on a Saturday morning. The woman had opened it and looked at him without saying anything. He had held out the wallet. She had taken it from him, opened it, and counted the cash in front of him, all $214 still there. She had looked at him the way people look at something they did not expect to see. On the bus home, James had asked his father what that look meant. His father had said, "That is not a reward. That is just a person who did not expect to see what they actually saw." James had kept that. Not by writing it down, not by talking about it, by doing it again the next time it was relevant, and the time after that, and for 40 years after that, in situations that ranged from a $2 overpayment at a convenience store to the afternoon some years back when he had found a laptop bag behind the security desk at Howard County General that contained a computer, a wallet with $600, and a thumb drive labeled Quarterly Projections, and had turned all of it in without opening the bag. He had not thought of any of it as remarkable. The man who came back for the laptop bag had been sweating and pale and had thanked him too many times, and James had told him it was no trouble, which was true, because it had been no trouble at all. You see the thing that does not belong to you, you give it back to the person it belongs to. There was nothing in between those two facts that required a decision, and the people who acted as though there was a decision in between were, in James's experience, telling you something about themselves. In the left pocket of his wallet, behind his Metro card and his health insurance card, he carried a small laminated badge. The plastic had gone brittle at one corner, and there was a hairline crack running from the corner toward the edge of his photo. The text was faded white letters on a dark blue background, but held to the right light, you could still read it. James A. Osei, Emergency Medical Technician, Basic, Baltimore City Emergency Medical Services, and below that, a certification number. The certification had been valid from 2002 to 2006. He had been 26 when he passed the exam, 27 when he went on his first call, 29 when he had to stop. The accident had not been dramatic in any of the ways accidents get described. A patch of ice on Route 40 in Ellicott City in January. His car, an Impala with tires that had needed replacing since October, which he had been planning to do in spring when the tax refund came, had gone sideways into a guardrail at roughly 40 miles per hour. The right knee had connected with the underside of the dashboard in a specific way that required surgery, then a second surgery, then a conversation with his orthopedic surgeon about realistic outcomes. The surgeon had said, "You can work, you can walk, you can do most things, but you will not be able to run reliably, and in an emergency that matters. James had asked how reliably. The surgeon had given him a number. The number had been enough. He had not argued. There was nothing to argue with. A fact was a fact, and a standard was a standard. And he had understood since he was 12 years old that the wallet either goes back or it does not, and there is no version of the story where it half goes back. A man who could not be relied upon to run toward the thing everyone else was running from was not an emergency medical technician. He was a man with a card in his wallet. He understood the difference, and he was not going to pretend the difference away, because the truth of it was hard to carry. He had carried it anyway. The card stayed in the wallet. He could have thrown it out. He thought about that sometimes, in the way you think about a thing you already know you will not do. The card was not hope, and it was not regret. It was a record. It said that there had been 4 years in which he had been the person who arrived. He did not need anyone else to read it. He needed only to know it was there, behind the Metro card, where it lived. He had taken the first job that kept him inside a hospital. That had been more than 20 years ago. He had moved through 3 hospitals before Mercy General positions at Sinai Hospital, then Howard County General, then Johns Hopkins Bayview, each one ending for reasons that had nothing to do with his performance and everything to do with contracted staffing decisions that eliminated positions from the bottom up. He had learned not to take it personally. He had learned to start the next thing. At Mercy General, he had been at the main security desk for 8 years without interruption. He knew the name of every nurse on the night shift. He knew which residents ordered Thai food from the place on St. Paul Street at 2 in the morning and which ones favored the all-night diner on North Charles. He knew that the elevator on the east side of the building ran 2 seconds slower than the one on the west, and that if you were in a hurry you took the west one without thinking about it. He knew that the vending machine on the second floor dispensed pretzels the good kind, the ones that cost $1.80 if you tapped the upper right corner of the panel firmly before pressing the selection button, and that this had been true for at least 3 years, and was not a glitch he was going to report, because it was the kind of thing that made a long night slightly shorter for someone who needed it. He knew more than that, too, the way a man knows a building he has stood inside for 8 years of nights. He knew which doors stuck in the cold and which ones swung too freely and would slam if you let them. He knew the sound the heating system made before it kicked on in October and the different sound it made in March when it was tired. He knew which families came back. There was a woman who came every Thursday to sit with a man on the 4th floor, and she always arrived after visiting hours, and James always let her up, because some rules were written for the daytime and the night had its own. He knew her by her coat before he knew her by her face. He kept a notepad at the security desk. Black cover, college ruled, purchased in a 3-pack at the Dollar General on Greenmount for $4.29, 3 columns, date, incident, resolution. In 8 years, there had been 412 incidents logged. The range was wide. One attempted break-in, a man who had entered through an unlatched emergency exit at 4 in the morning and who James had redirected to the emergency department because the man was, in James's assessment, in need of a psychiatric evaluation rather than a criminal one. 2 medical emergencies in the lobby, once a visitor who had gone into cardiac arrest at the reception desk, once a staff member who had fainted near the elevator, both of whom James had assisted, until the clinical staff arrived. 11 lockouts, 47 visitor disputes, ranging from a family argument over a room assignment to a man who had arrived with a handwritten list of grievances about a billing error and who had needed 40 minutes of patient conversation before he would agree to use the phone number James had found for him. And one occasion, this one, James had written up in detail because it seemed important to have on record, on which a man had arrived at the front entrance at midnight, carrying a laundry bag that contained a raccoon. The man had claimed the raccoon had bitten his wife. The raccoon had, in fact, bitten James as well during the handoff to animal control, though James had noted in the incident report that this was his own fault for not waiting for the gloves. The cardiac arrest was the one he remembered when he remembered any of them. A man in his 60s had come in behind his wife, who was the patient, and had sat down in the chair by the reception desk to wait, and had then not been sitting so much as sliding, and James had been around the desk before the slide finished. He had done the thing his hands still knew how to do. He had counted out loud, the way you are taught to count, and he had kept counting until the clinical team came through the doors with the cart, and then he had stepped back and let them have the man, and gone to find the wife, so that she would not learn it from the sound of the room. None of that had required him to run. He had noted that, privately, afterward. The thing the surgeon had taken from him had not been the thing that mattered that night. But he did not let himself make too much of that, because the next night it might be the other way, and a standard that only held when it was convenient was not a standard. Every entry had a resolution. Every resolution was his. He folded the notepad closed at 7 every morning, placed it in the top right drawer of the desk, same position, same orientation, and walked home. He took the route that went past the bakery on North Avenue, which opened at 6:30, and which, on mornings when he had the pocket change for it, sold a coffee for $1.50 and a roll for 75 cents. On mornings when the pocket change was not there, he walked past it without slowing down. He had been doing this, or some version of this, for most of his adult life. He did not think of it as difficult. He thought of it as the route. Stay with me. What happens next is the part that stays with you. Dr. Patricia Hale had been Chief Executive Officer of Mercy General Hospital for 9 years. She had an office on the 7th floor with a window that looked south toward the harbor, and she looked at the view approximately twice a year, once in December when the city put the lights up around the inner harbor basin, and once in April when the cherry trees bloomed along the promenade, and you could see the color from 7 stories up, if you happened to be standing at the window for another reason. She was not, as a rule, someone who stood at windows. She had a calendar managed by an administrative coordinator named Vivian, who had been with her for 6 years, and who could, when necessary, run interference with the kind of authority usually reserved for people with much larger titles. She had a chief of staff, a legal counsel, a director of operations, and an endowment board of 11 people who met quarterly, and who she had learned, over 9 years, to treat as a constituency rather than a governing body, which was the only approach that produced results. She had not chosen hospital administration. She had been a hospitalist, an internal medicine physician who managed inpatient care, and she had been good at it, and the board had noticed that she was good at it, and the previous CEO had retired, and she had been in the room when the conversation started, and she had not left. That was essentially the whole story. She had not campaigned for it. She had simply not walked out when it would have been easy to walk out. She had learned the job the way she learned everything, which was by doing it badly for a while and paying attention to the parts she did badly. The first year she had tried to be a doctor with a bigger office and had discovered that the building did not need another doctor. It needed someone who could hold the whole thing in her head at once, the beds and the budget and the board and the night shift and the loading bay and the thing the night shift knew that the budget never showed. She had gotten better at holding it. She had also, she was aware, gotten further from the floor. Those two things had happened at the same time, and she had told herself they were not related and had known, in the way you know a thing you do not examine, that they were. She was 58 years old. She had grown up in Atlanta, in a house on the west side that her mother, Cynthia Hale, had kept with the particular precision of a woman who understood that in the absence of abundance, order was itself a form of wealth. Her mother had worked as a cafeteria supervisor at a public school district for 31 years. She had organized the kitchen, the way other people organize their finances, everything in its place. No waste, nothing bought that had not been thought about first. She had retired at 63, with a pension that was not large, but was reliable, and that she had supplemented with a garden that produced, by Patricia's childhood estimate, approximately 40% of what the family ate between May and October. Patricia had become a doctor because she had been 12 years old and in the waiting room of a hospital in Atlanta for 6 hours while her mother recovered from a procedure, and she had spent those 6 hours watching the people who moved through the building, the ones who moved with purpose, the ones who moved with fear, the ones who sat where she was sitting and waited the way her mother waited, with their hands folded and their faces arranged into something that was not patience, but looked like it from the outside, and she had decided that she wanted to be the kind of person who moved with purpose in a building like that. She had not, at 12, understood how large the distance was between that intention and the practice of medicine. By the time she understood it fully, she was far enough in that the understanding was operational rather than discouraging. She had been a resident at Mercy General. In her 3rd year of residency, she had worked back-to-back shifts 11 times in a 14-day stretch, a practice that was not officially sanctioned, and was not officially recorded, and that happened because a stomach virus had taken down 2-3 of the other residents on her rotation, and someone had to be there, and she was the one who said yes when the attending asked. She was not going to complain about it. She had understood what she was agreeing to. What she had not understood was what it would cost her body by the end of the 14th day, a cost she had been paying down gradually in smaller increments, and which had been, by that point, compounding. On the night of the 4th of November, 2009, she had finished a shift at 11 in the evening, and had walked to the parking structure, and had gotten into her car and had sat behind the wheel for a moment before pulling out. She had the specific memory of the moment before she lost consciousness, the particular quality of the silence in the car, after she turned the engine off, the way the yellow light of the parking structure came through the windshield and landed on the backs of her hands on the steering wheel, the thought, which was the last clear thought she had for some time after, that she should eat something before she drove home. She had woken up to a voice. Male, calm, not alarmed, steady, the way a person sounds when they have learned to sound steady in situations where the instinct is to be the opposite. He had been saying her name. He must have gotten it from her badge, which she was still wearing, and asking her to keep her eyes open and tell him what year it was and whether she could feel her hands. She had been confused for some time after that. She remembered the lights of the emergency bay. She remembered a nurse with a penlight. She remembered a call being placed to her attending, and the attending arriving in street clothes, having been pulled from something, and saying words that eventually resolved into, "You have had a small stroke. Transient. You need to rest." She had been in the hospital for 24 hours. She had been treated by colleagues who were careful not to use her title in front of the nursing staff, which she had appreciated. She had gone home and slept for 16 hours. She had never found out the name of the person who found her. She had meant to. It was on her list, the internal list she kept of things that required action and that were not yet scheduled, which was a different list from the one Vivienne managed and which was written nowhere at all, just carried. She had thought about it in the days immediately after, when the event was recent and the intention was clear. Then the rotation had resumed and the days had filled up, and the intention had not disappeared but had receded, the way things do when life keeps requiring your attention in specific, immediate ways. She had thought about it a few more times over the years. Once when she was promoted to director and was going through old files and had come across a copy of the discharge paperwork. Once when she read a piece in a medical journal about physician burnout and sleep deprivation and had felt a specific recognition that was not quite guilt, but lived in the same neighborhood. Once when she was a new CEO and was standing in the parking structure making a call and had noticed for no reason she could name the column she had been parked next to that night. She had never done anything with any of those moments. The hospital became what it became, an institution she managed, a building she moved through purposefully, a responsibility she took seriously in ways she could document and measure. The night in the parking garage had become something she knew about herself without discussing, the way people hold certain events at a distance, not because they are ashamed of them, but because the event is too specific to translate easily into the daily language of institutional life. She walked through the lobby every morning, past the security desk, past the vending machines. She had done this for 9 years. She had not, in 9 years, looked at the man behind the security desk long enough to read his name. This was not unkindness. She would have told you, if you had asked her, that she valued the people who kept the building running, and she would have meant it, and she would have been able to point to budget decisions that proved it. But valuing a category of people and seeing the person in front of you are two different acts, performed by two different parts of a person, and the second one requires that you slow down, and she had spent 9 years not slowing down. The man at the desk was part of the building working correctly. You do not look at the things that are working. That is the privilege of the things that work. They get to be invisible. It is also the cost. The evening of the 17th of October was a Thursday. Patricia was in her office at 1:45, 3 hours and 15 minutes past when she had intended to leave, which was itself 45 minutes past when Vivienne had suggested she leave, and which all of them understood was simply how it was reviewing the final pages of a contract renewal with their electronic records vendor. The contract was for 5 years. It had been negotiated over 6 months, and she had been through 4 drafts, and this was the last one. and she was reading with the particular attention of someone who has read the same document 4 times and is aware that familiarity can produce the same result as carelessness. Her monitor went dark. Not a sleep timeout. A sleep timeout begins at the edges. This was all at once. The screen, the taskbar, the document, the clock in the lower corner. Dark. And then she heard, from the corridor, the sound of people beginning to move differently than they had been moving a moment before, voices at a register slightly higher than the ambient, the specific frequency that belongs to people asking questions to which they do not yet have answers. The emergency lighting came on in the corridor, a strip of amber along the baseboard. Her cell phone rang. Her director of information security, a man named Gary, whose number she had memorized because she had made a policy of memorizing numbers that mattered. He said, "We have an intrusion attempt, patient record system. I need authorization for a full administrative network lockdown." She said, "You have it." She was moving toward the door before the call ended. The elevator was offline power redirect during the lockdown. She took the stairs, which were lit by the emergency strips, and which were full of a particular silence that comes from a building that has stopped running the way it is supposed to run, the mechanical silence of systems that have gone quiet mid-process. She went down 6 floors. She came out on the ground level. The lobby was amber-lit and still. The overnight reception attendant was on the phone, her voice tight, her free hand flat on the desk as if bracing. At the security desk, the chair was empty. Patricia walked the east corridor toward the server room. She heard him before she saw him, not a voice, footsteps, and the specific sound of a radio being keyed, and a man's voice saying something in a register that was quiet enough to be precise, and loud enough to carry to the person it needed to reach. James was standing in front of the server room door at the end of the east corridor. The indicator light above the door was amber. He had his left hand at his side and his right hand at the radio on his hip, and he was facing the door the way a person faces a door when they have decided that the door is their responsibility, and that responsibility does not end until someone with the authority to relieve it shows up. Patricia stopped beside him. She said, "How long?" He said, 16 minutes. She said, "Has anyone accessed the room?" He said, "No." 2 staff redirected. 1 individual without identification currently with Officer Webb at the east stairwell. She said, "What triggered your response?" He said, "The indicator light. Amber without a maintenance log means the door has been opened without authorization. I called the information desk on the internal line at 11:45. The call did not connect. I called Gary directly from my personal cell." She looked at the log on her phone. Gary had sent it while she was on the stairs. The server room had been accessed using a cloned keycard at 11:41. The network intrusion had begun 2 minutes later. James had been standing at this door at the moment the intrusion began. The breach had been contained. The patient record system had been isolated before the intrusion reached the active database. 40,000 patient records had not been accessed. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She and Gary went into the server room. The door closed behind her. James walked back to the security desk. He sat down. He opened his notepad to a fresh line. He wrote the date. He wrote the incident. He started on the resolution, which was going to take more than 1 line. He did not sleep well that night. He rarely did after a night that broke the route, not because the night had frightened him, but because his body, having been asked to do something other than the route, took its time settling back into the man who did the route. He lay in the dark on East Biddle Street with the badge in the wallet on the dresser and his right knee making its slow complaint, and he thought, not for very long, that he had been standing at the right door at the right time, and then he thought that this was simply what standing at the door was for, and then he slept. Patricia did not sleep either. She came home at 2:40 and lay in bed looking at the ceiling with the particular kind of alertness that is the opposite of tiredness, the kind that comes from an event that is technically resolved, but that has not finished being processed. She was thinking about the amber light, about the gap between the cloned card and the intrusion, about the specific fact that if the man at the security desk had not noticed what he noticed, the call to the information desk would have happened later, the response would have happened later, the isolation would have happened later, and the event log would have told a different story. She thought about the way he had stood at that door. She had seen a great many people respond to a great many emergencies over the course of a long career, and she had developed an eye for the difference between a person performing competence and a person being competent, and the man at the door had not been performing anything. He had been a fixed point. The building had come apart around him, and he had been the part that did not move. In the morning she called Vivienne at 2 minutes before 8 and asked for the personnel file of the overnight security officer at the main desk. Vivienne said, "I'll have it to you by mid-morning." The file came in at 11 minutes before 11. James Aloysius Osei, age 52, current position, security officer, main desk, overnight shift. Length of current employment, 8 years, 2 months, 14 days. Prior hospital security employment. Howard County General, 4 years. Johns Hopkins Bayview, 3 years. Prior certifications. She read the next line. Emergency Medical Technician, Basic. Baltimore City Emergency Medical Services. Certification, active from 2002 to 2006. Lapse due to injury resulting in inability to meet physical requirements for active emergency response. She sat with that for a moment. Then she opened the archive tab. The hospital's information systems contained an archive of all incident reports and associated documentation going back about 22 years for incidents involving responding personnel from Baltimore City Emergency Medical Services. The system linked out to a shared archive maintained by the city. She had accessed it once before, years ago, for an unrelated matter. She did not know why she typed in the date. It was a specific date, the 4th of November, 2009, and it was specific in the way that dates are specific only to the people who were present for the thing that happened on them, not to anyone else. She had not looked at it in years, she had not spoken it aloud in years. But she knew it the way, she knew the floor plan of the parking structure and the weight of the discharge paperwork, and the specific sound of the voice that had said her name in the dark. She typed it into the search field. The 4th of November, 2009. 2:45 in the morning. Parking structure C, Mercy General Hospital. 1 result. A 1-page incident report, typed, with the formatting of a document old enough to have been scanned rather than born digital. Patient presenting with symptoms consistent with transient ischemic attack. Found unresponsive in personal vehicle in covered parking facility. Patient stabilized on scene. Transferred to emergency department. Patient name, redacted per standard protocol. Responding personnel. 2 names. The second name she did not know. The first name was James A. Osei, Emergency Medical Technician, Basic, badge number. Patricia did not move for some time. She looked at the name. Then she looked up from the screen. Through the glass of her office door, at the end of the east corridor, James was there. He was doing his morning handoff with the day shift officer, a young man named Webb. He had his notepad open, and he was going through it page by page, saying something she could not hear, Webb nodding at intervals. James's back was partly toward her. He did not know she was watching. He had walked past her desk 341 times, by the rough count of her 9 years in this office. She had walked past his desk the same number of times. Neither of them had known. She looked at the name on the screen. Then she closed the file. That afternoon she sent a note to her Director of Human Resources. She wrote it herself, without asking Vivienne to draft it, because the wording was specific and she wanted the wording to be hers. The note said, "I want a complete review of wage bands for overnight support staff security, environmental services, dietary completed within 30 days and on my desk with recommendations before the next budget cycle. This is not a scheduled review. This is a priority. I also want the results of the last 2 years of exit interviews for overnight support staff flagged and sent to me. And I want to know what the current status is of the Professional Development Scholarship Program, and specifically whether there are pathways for employees with lapsed medical certifications." She did not say why. She sent the note. She went back to her calendar. She had a board call at 3 and a facilities review at 4:30 and a dinner with the chief of surgery at 6, which she was going to attend because the chief of surgery was a person worth maintaining a real relationship with, and because there was a structural question about cardiac care that had been sitting in the background of several conversations for a while, and that needed a meal and a glass of water and some unscheduled time to come to the surface properly. She moved through all of it the way she moved through everything, with purpose, holding the whole building in her head at once. But there was now a thing in the building she had not been holding before, a thing she had walked past 341 times, and she found that it did not leave her while she did the board call, or the facilities review, or sat across from the chief of surgery and talked about beds and budgets. It stayed where she had put it, which was somewhere behind the daily language, in the place where she kept the parking garage. After the dinner she went home. She did not call anyone. She did not write anything down. She had one more thing to do. It required nothing except showing up. The following morning was a Friday. Patricia arrived at the building at 13 minutes past 7. She came through the main entrance with her badge in one hand and her coffee in the other. The lobby was in its morning configuration, the reception desk fully staffed, the early visitors beginning to arrive, the light coming in from the east-facing windows at the angle that made the marble floors look less tired than they did at night. James was behind the security desk. He was 6 minutes from the end of his shift. His notepad was open. He was writing the last entry of the night. She could see, from across the lobby, the way his pen moved, which was the way a person writes when they are finishing something they have been doing for a long time and that they will do again tomorrow in exactly the same way, which is not the same as habit and is not the same as routine, but is something between them that does not have a clean name. She crossed the lobby. She stopped in front of the security desk. He looked up. She said, "Good morning, James." He went still. One breath, not a long pause the length of time it takes a person to hear something they did not expect and to confirm that they heard it correctly. From the loading bay, the delivery cart came through the east doors, its wheels tracking across the marble with the specific squeak James had noted twice in the maintenance log and that had not been fixed in 14 months. Then he said, "Good morning, Dr. Hale." She nodded once, the small nod of a person acknowledging something, and she turned and walked toward the elevator. She did not look back. James watched her go. He watched until the elevator doors closed and the indicator above the door lit up with the second floor, then the third, then continued up. He looked back down at the notepad. He looked at the last line of his last entry, which he had not finished. He set the pen down. He reached into his left pants pocket. His wallet was always in his left pocket, had been since he was 14 and had read something about pickpockets, and had switched sides out of precaution and had never switched back. He took the wallet out. He opened it to the left pocket behind the Metro card. The badge was there. He took it out and set it on the desk in front of him, face up. The plastic was cool from being against his thigh all night. The crack at the corner was the same as it had always been, not longer, not wider, just present. The text was faded but legible if you knew where to look. He turned it over once, then back. He sat with it for a minute. Around him the lobby continued the way lobbies continue, people arriving, the reception desk phone ringing, the elevator returning to the ground floor and opening for someone. The delivery truck that had been wrong by 3 minutes for 11 months pulled up outside, and the hydraulic brake sounded, and someone wheeled a cart through the loading bay doors with that same squeak. He picked up the badge. He put it back in the wallet, behind the Metro card, where it lived. He closed the notepad and placed it in the top right drawer of the desk in the same position it always occupied. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walked out of the building. On the first step down, his right foot turned slightly outward, the way it always did, the way it had been doing for more than 20 years, and he went down the steps and turned left on East Biddle Street, toward home.